Hi, I'm Helen, and welcome to my book club. And I know what you're thinking. Oh my goodness, we're in a pandemic and we cannot have book clubs. But my book club is made up of some very special people, and I'm going to introduce them to you right now. First of all, this is Mr. Salem, and Salem makes an appearance in several of my books, and he kind of edits them for me. I come back and I find pages of stuff that he has written. This is Peter. Peter is a little stiff, but he will get hopping pretty soon. I think we all know who this asshole is, and he just keeps showing up. And this guy here, he's pretty straight and narrow. You know, he's good to have around. This guy is from out of town, and I actually brought him back on a plane from Texas. That in itself could be a book. This guy here is always getting into stuff. This is Stitch, and you got to watch him because he tends to walk off. And this guy right here, he is a little upset about the whole virus thing. He seems to have lost his head, and anyway, he's decided to come to the book club. This guy here is actually her name. It's a her, and her name is Nan. And when my mother passed away, I was left her fur coat, and I had it made into a teddy bear. And I mean, the fur coat, not my mother. And my friend Ben made this, and he has movable arms and legs. And I always keep her around. And this, I don't know who this is. This is just some chick who dropped by. And so I'm going to let her stay. Hi, now it's time to read Operation Vanish. It is the second book in the Operation series. It's not related to Operation Wormwood at all. You don't have to read one to read the other. It's a completely separate investigation. This one is an RCMP investigation into murdered and missing women and children in rural Newfoundland in the 1950s, and an investigation into how the fairy culture in Newfoundland and Labrador actually played a huge role into how violence against women and children and those considered vulnerable was normalized. And very interesting what my research found out. A lot of research went into this book. So I hope you do find it interesting, and it is available from Flanker Press. Every time I think of that day, I remember it in black and white. Mary Ryan sat at the kitchen table in her old Carboneer saltbox house, sipping her hot tea from a proper porcelain cup with a matching saucer. Everything except the hat, she adds. The hat is red and white. RCMP Corporal Gail McNaughton sat across from Mary taking notes. Her main objective with this first file was to befriend Mary and to simply find out the truth about what happened that day. My memory hasn't faded one bit. I just don't know why it's in black and white. She looked out of the kitchen window at the fishing boat tugging along across the harbor. McNaughton had investigated many heinous crimes, but never a child abduction case. She looked around the kitchen and admired the wood trim on the walls. It looked like it had been painted 100 times. This is a great home. I love the detail. And they don't make houses like this anymore. She ran her hand over the white wainscoting. Do you go by Rhine or Clark Rhine? Rhine, Mary Rhine. Please call me by my name, Mary. I left my maiden name, Clark, on the file, so you'll know Ellen and I are sisters. She looked around the room with pride. Our great-grandfather built this house with his own 2 hands. He cut down the lumber from the hill out back and dragged it out by horse and sled. He and his brothers built the entire thing without so much as a sketch to go by. She stood up in front of the window overlooking the garden. Our great-grandmother planted that garden. She pointed to a vegetable patch not far from the house. My father used to say, for the first 3 months after this house was built, Grandnanny seen more of the horse's arse than she ever did Grandpappy's face. She giggled to herself. Day and night she plowed that patch of land and sowed the seeds. I still use the same seeds. That's amazing. Corporal McNaughton stood next to her, looking out at the plot of land. You lived in this house all your life? So did my father, and his father, and his father before him. Have you ever lived anywhere else, even for a short time? McNaughton knew every detail would matter in this investigation. No, never. When I was married, my bill to move in with me and Dad. She spoke sweetly when she referred to her husband and parents. Both Mom and Dad were older by then, so we needed the help around here. The corporal noticed a framed picture on the wall of Mary and her husband in their wedding clothes. Your husband is a handsome man. Mary placed her hand over her heart. Yes, that's my Bill. Never was there a finer looking man. Her voice quivered when she spoke his name. McNaughton took note of the kindness in her eyes when she looked at the photo. Mary's eyes reminded her of Doris. Doris, she thought. How am I going to balance Doris with this new position? I should be in Ottawa in the federal policing branch, giving my career an incredible boost, but instead I had to turn it down to take a position at major crime in St. John's so I could take care of Doris. She didn't want to be bitter about it. She loved Doris and would do anything for her. She pushed the thought from her mind and tried to stay focused. He was quite the looker, that's for sure. He was quite the catch, too. Mary's lips were trembling, and McNaughton didn't want to make her cry. Well, you were quite the looker yourself, she winked at Mary. Oh, yes, yes, I always kept myself up. She put her hand to her cheek. There was a slight tremor in her arm. Her fingers were swollen and red, with bony knobs on the joints. Even though she was almost 80, her face still had a youthful glow. I have beauty secrets, you know. McNaughton let out a chuckle. You do? You must tell me. Your skin is beautiful. Well, she said, when I drain a pot of potatoes, I always put my face in over the steam. It opens up all the pores, you know, and it keeps you looking young. She nodded like she had passed on a secret beauty tip. I'll keep that in mind, said McNaughton, sitting down at the kitchen table. We'd better get through this. I don't want to keep you all day. Mary joined her at the table again. I really just wanted to drop in to meet you and introduce myself. I know you were close to the last investigator, Boyd Michaels, for the last few years. He was promoted to staff sergeant in charge of major crime unit a few months ago, and your file was given to me. So as the investigator, I thought I'd drop by. I didn't want you to think that we had forgotten about Ellen. No, I know you'd never forget about poor Ellen. I believe you're the 13th police officer on my sister's file. Mary paused, then added, I will miss Boyd, though. Every time he was in the area, he would drop in for a molasses bun. I swear he could smell those buns from St. John's. I hope he visits me sometime. Oh, I'm sure he will. His father was also an investigator on Ellen's file, too. I saw Inspector Michael's name on the file. Boyd is a lot like his father, McNaughton said and grinned. I actually worked for his father when I first joined the RCMP 10 years ago. He was my first supervisor in Nova Scotia. Well, what a coincidence. His father's a good man. It's no surprise his son is any different. I'm so glad you had a good relationship with Boyd and his father. He speaks very highly of you, too. You're the first woman police officer, though. Maybe you'll be the one who finds poor Ellen and brings her home. I would like to do that for you. McNaughton tried hard not to get emotionally involved in her files, but sometimes it was hard. Mary Ryan intrigued her. Well, let's start from the beginning. Just tell me what you can remember about that day. Ellen was 8 years old and I was about 10. It was July 10th, 1950, 5 days after Ellen's birthday. I'll never forget that day. We were berry picking on the hill just behind our house. We weren't that far away. We could still see the roof of the house from where we were. That was the rule my mother gave us. If we couldn't see the roof, we were gone too far. Mary rocked slowly in her chair. Her face saddened as the memories of that day crept in. McNaughton flipped to a new page in her notebook and began writing. It was getting on dark, and I felt the chill. I knew it was close to supper time because I smelled the fish cooking coming up over the hill. She laid down her teacup. I called out to Ellen over and over again. I thought she was playing hide and seek with me. I was getting angry because she wasn't answering. Mary walked slowly to the stove, lifting the big floury teapot and poured herself more tea. Do you want another cup? McNaughton politely shook her head. When did you realize Ellen was really missing and not just playing games? I thought that maybe she went home and forgot to tell me, so I ran back to the house and asked Mom where Ellen was. Mom was making supper. She pointed toward the stove as though her mother was still standing there. She told me to look upstairs. Mary stirred a big spoonful of sugar in her tea, followed by a drop of carnation milk. I looked all over the house. I got this feeling that something was wrong. I ran back upstairs and told Mom that Ellen was missing. She told me that that was nonsense and to look around the yard, so I did. And I ran back into the kitchen and told her I couldn't find her. By this time, I was bawling my eyes out. Mary's voice began to shake as she recalled her mother's reaction. My mother was mashing up potatoes with butter and milk. She dropped the potato masher in the pot. I can still see her wiping her hands in her apron, and the look on her face. She ran through the house and began screaming Ellen's name. I think she ran next door to the neighbors, shortly after my father came home from work, and then the house filled up with people from everywhere. They broke up into groups. The search went on for weeks. McNaughton looked up from her notes. It says in the file that the searchers didn't find anything. No, not a thing. Not a shoe or a piece of clothing. Nothing. Mary sighed. My father searched every day until the day he died. He knew this piece of land better than anyone. Can you recall how long it was from the moment you both started picking berries to the moment Ellen went missing? I don't know, Mary paused. I would say maybe a half hour or so. Do you remember what you and Ellen were talking about while you were together? Mary leaned her forearms on the kitchen table. Well, that was 68 years ago, but I believe we were just talking about where the best berry patches were. Most have been picked over. I don't remember her saying anything that sticks out in my mind. She was complaining about her arm hurting because she had gotten a needle from the doctor the day before. If you think of anything else, you can call me. McNaughton laid her business card on the table. Why did she get a needle? Oh, it was a smallpox vaccine. I do remember that. We both got it, and my arm still hurt that morning, too. Do you remember seeing anyone else in the area? No, not a soul. There was no one around, only me and Ellen. Was anyone at your house that day before you went berry picking? No. After Dad went to work, Mom said about doing laundry and cleaning. I know it was a long time ago, but do you remember seeing anyone else around? Maybe you passed somebody on the way up to the hill that day, McNaughton suggested. Nobody. We were alone. I would have remembered if anyone else was there. McNaughton pressed on. Did anyone else know you were going berry picking that day? We went berry picking most days. I suppose Mom knew where we were, Mary added. McNaughton referred to her notes. Just going back to what you first told me, you remember seeing a red and white hat. Who owned the hat? Oh my, look at the sky. Mary sat up and looked out of the kitchen window next to the table. Red sky at night, sailors' delight. Red sky at morning, sailors take warning. She sat back in her chair and looked at the young corporal. That's what the old folks used to say. Red sky at night means a good day tomorrow, but a red sky in the morning means a stormy day. Mary took a second to size up Corporal McNaughton. Are you from Newfoundland? I am. I'm from St. John's, but I lived in Nova Scotia for the past 10 years. I was posted there after my RCMP training. I transferred to headquarters in St. John's a month ago. MacNaughton worked hard to get where she was. Joining the force under her father's long-reaching shadow was difficult. Her father, Chief Superintendent Jack MacNaughton, retired 10 years ago, a month after he had presented her with her badge at RCMP depot in Regina. Her father waited until she finished training to put in his retirement papers. He left with 40 years' service. She suspected he would have stayed even longer, except Doris was beginning to show signs of her illness then. To this day, Gail was still called Jack MacNaughton's kid instead of Corporal. I never worked outside the home after I got married, said Mary with a smile. But I certainly worked inside of it, with 7 children and a husband who was never home. What did your husband do? Oh, he fished, like everyone else around here. Mary looked out the window at the trawlers tied to the docks. He mostly fished on the Labrador up north. She nodded up at the ceiling. Poor Bill died last year. The cancer took him. Oh, I'm so sorry. MacNaughton looked toward the pictures of kids stuck on the front of the fridge door. You have lots of grandkids. Do you get to see them much? Mary stood up and walked over to the pictures. I have 2 daughters who live in St. John's. They come most Sundays for their dinner and with their families sometimes. The rest live on the mainland. 4 boys are up in Fort McMurray, and I have another daughter in Ontario. They try to get home in the summertime. You live by yourself. You must be active in the community. Oh, I'll die in this old house, and then I suppose the youngsters will fight over who gets it. Mary came back and sat at the table. I don't go out much. She avoided looking the police corporal in the eye. MacNaughton sensed there was a little more to that story. Do you have other family or friends around? No, not really. Mary seemed uneasy. After Ellen went missing, people whispered a lot whenever I walked by. I became known as the girl whose sister disappeared. Adults treated me like I was cursed or something. Children were afraid of me. People didn't understand back then, see? She sipped her tea again. I used to feel like I was having a heart attack if I thought somebody was just looking at me. Today, they'd call that anxiety attacks. I don't like to be around people much, really. Do you remember what you were wearing that day? What we were wearing? Mary looked off as if to recapture a memory. Now, we didn't have much. My poor father was just a fisherman, like I said, but now my mother, she could sew anything. We had on the same thing we wore every day, I suppose. Matching petticoats. My mother had made a cardigan she had knit, and bobby socks with saddle shoes. Mother always dressed us alike. I have a picture of me and Ellen that was taken on her birthday the week before. Can I see it? Yes, it's in the parlor. Mary went to the front room and returned with a small black and white picture in a tarnished silver frame. I remember we had been playing just before this picture was taken. She paused as she looked at it. Ellen liked to sing Little Bo Peep, and we swing each other around in a circle. Little Bo Peep? MacNaughton asked. Yes, you must know that one. Mary handed her the picture. Little Bo Peep has lost her sheep and doesn't know where to find them. MacNaughton looked closely at the image of the 2 girls standing next to the house she was now sitting in. The smaller girl held an old cloth doll in her arms, and it dragged on the ground. Her face was round with upturned eyes, and her tongue was slightly stuck out. She had a short, stocky build. The taller girl held her by the hand tightly. Her feet were turned in so that the toes of her shoes touched. They both smiled awkwardly for the camera. I don't remember that rhyme. That's Ellen, she pointed to the smaller girl, and that's me. Would you mind if I took a picture of this with my phone? I would like to have it for my file. Sure, if you like. The RCMP should have Ellen's pictures in their file, or whatever we had from back then. Boyd told me her case will stay open until her body is found. She sat back down to the kitchen table. I suppose it would just be bones by now. We never close a file until there is a conclusion. McNaughton put her phone back in her blazer pocket. I've read through your sister's file. Do you remember talking to the police? Well, it took a day for the police to show up. You have to remember this was 1950 and a Mountie had to come out from St. John's. At that time, a child was seen and not heard. I don't recall doing a formal interview or anything. My parents did all the talking. The notes on the file said he asked you questions in the presence of your parents. I believe he did ask me a few questions, but I don't remember it being formal or anything. I remember he was a tall man in a uniform. I'd never seen a Mountie before that day. Sorry to keep going back to this, but I'm just trying to get it straight in my head. McNaughton put her pen down and stopped taking notes. The file says he interviewed you. Not really, Mary thought back. He only asked me a few questions, and then my grandmother took me upstairs to my bedroom and stayed with me until my parents spoke to the police officer. Are you sure? McNaughton was puzzled. Maybe it seemed like a few questions, but it was really a lot of questions. No, I remember distinctly. My grandmother was afraid that I would go into the fits because of all the people coming and going in the house and talking about what could have happened to Ellen. She didn't want me to hear it. You see, people were dropping off food or dropping in for an update. Nan knew it was frightening me, so she took me upstairs when the Mountie came, and Mom and Dad answered the questions. McNaughton had discussed the challenges of investigating historical cases with her supervisor. She knew there wasn't much to go on besides faded memories. So the house wasn't cordoned off. People were coming and going. Oh, yes, the whole community was here at some point. The house was filled, and every day people were up walking through the hills looking for her. So much for protecting the crime scene, McNaughton thought. So why were you picking berries that day? We used to pick buckets of berries and sell them to the merchant in town. My mother would get store credit for it. She would then use the credit for flour, molasses, and stuff. Although there weren't many berries to be found in July, we were just playing, really. Okay, so you had a little business, McNaughton smiled. Yes, I suppose we did. You mentioned you always remember that day in black and white, except for the red and white hat. Why is that? McNaughton had never heard of anything like that before. I really don't know. I have asked the priest about it many times, and he seems to think that it was such a traumatic event that it knocked the color right out of my memory, all except for that hat. Who owned the hat? Mary looked uncomfortable again. She shrugged her shoulders. It wasn't ours. Do you know who owned it? I don't know. What is the significance of the hat? McNaughton thought to herself. She made a note in her book to research it. There's no hat in evidence. Did anyone pick it up? I overheard my father say they couldn't find it. Maybe the wind blew it away. Nobody thought it was important at the time. Do you remember anything else about it? Like, was it an adult's hat or a child's hat? Did it have flowers on it? Was it striped? It was a red and white cap. That's all I remember. Do you remember anyone showing Ellen any attention leading up to her disappearance? Maybe a neighbor or someone in the community. McNaughton was determined to get through her list of required questions. She had just finished her advanced investigative course 3 weeks ago. It was mandatory with her promotion into the RCMP Major Crime Unit. No, not really. Everyone loved Ellen, you know. She was such a lovable child, considering all the struggles she had in her short life. Struggles? What kind of struggles? Well, she wasn't as quick as the other children at school. She had a hard time remembering numbers for some reason. She couldn't remember much of anything the teacher said, but she never forgot the nursery rhymes, probably because we sang them so often. Why was that? Mom said she was born perfectly normal, but one day she was hanging out clothes and heard Ellen crying in her playpen. Ellen was about 2 then. When she went inside, she said Ellen looked different. After that, Ellen was slow learning to walk and talk. She couldn't keep up with the other girls her age and had to make signs with her hands to tell us what she wanted. She didn't use many words. She would often rock back and forth and stare off into space. Was she developmentally delayed? McNaughton couldn't remember seeing that in the file. Nope, she was a changeling, Mary informed her. A changeling? Well, that's what my mother believed. While she was hanging out clothes, she believed the good people came and took her healthy baby and replaced her with a changeling. McNaughton looked up from her notes. I don't understand. What are good people? Mary finished her tea with a gulp. The good people were known to sneak into houses and substitute one of their sickly babies for a healthy one. They used to do that all the time. Not so much nowadays. You mean like gypsies or some group like that? No, the good people. Mary lowered her voice in a whisper and continued, the fairies. She added, putting her fingers to her lips like she had said a swear word. McNaughton had heard of fairy folklore but didn't know much about it. Fairies didn't visit St. John's where she grew up. They didn't like streetlights, or so Doris once told her. They were an Outport tradition. How did your mother treat Ellen after the good people turned her into a changeling? She treated her as she always did. Once the good people take your child, you have to treat the changeling as you would your own, because that's how they're going to treat your child. I see. McNaughton went back to her notebook. Did your mother resent Ellen after that? No, she loved Ellen. Everywhere Mom went, she took Ellen. What do you think happened to your sister? Maybe the good people came back for her, Mary said with a nod. That may have been what you believed back in 1950. But today, knowing that fairies or good people don't exist, what do you think happened to her? McNaughton asked. I don't know. Maybe the good people did take her away. Mary looked quite serious. Why would you believe that? McNaughton was taken aback by her answer. Because they changed her when she was a baby. Maybe they came back to get her. Mary's face grew tight and her eyes narrowed as she looked at this new police investigator. She quickly folded her arms and leaned away from the table. Mary had run into the same skepticism throughout the years with other investigators. McNaughton knew she had to pull back a bit before she lost Mary's trust. But now, in 2018, you must realize that Ellen had to be mentally delayed in some way. The fairies didn't sneak in and take a healthy baby and leave a sick one, then come back years later and take her back again. Look, that's the story I was told as a child, so that's what I believe. Mary sighed her annoyance at having to go through this again with another police officer. McNaughton remembered her instructor emphasizing that a good investigator had to be a friend of those closest to the victim to gain their trust. I'm sorry. I know this is still traumatic for you. Would you mind if I looked around? Not at all. Mary got up and opened the kitchen door that led to the backyard. Mary, looking out at this hill every day must bring back that day to you. Why did you stay in this house after all these years? In case Ellen came back. I had to be here for her. McNaughton smiled at the innocence of her answer. Is there anything you want to tell me that I haven't asked you? McNaughton smiled. Mary thought for a moment. I got a good feeling about you. Maybe you'll be the one who brings Ellen home. I can feel her around me sometimes, and today I feel her spirit stronger than ever. I guess the only thing I have to ask you is please don't give up. Please bring my sister home. I just want to give her a proper burial before I die. I will try my best. McNaughton thanked Mary for her time and walked out to the big backyard and up the hill where Ellen had gone missing. There were no cliffs to fall over, no ponds to fall in, just flat land covered in berry bushes. There was a thick forest at the top of the hill. She walked down to the front of the house and looked back at the hill again. She felt a sudden breeze blow up around her pant legs, sending grass clippings and dust into the air. A shiver went down her spine. McNaughton took out her phone and brought up the picture of Mary and Ellen in the silver frame. She realized she was standing in the exact spot where the picture had been taken. I wish I could just jump inside this picture and find out what this child knows, she thought. That's a fairy squall. McNaughton was startled. She looked up from her phone towards the house. Mary had opened the front door. That's a fairy squall that came up around you just then. She pointed toward the wind that circled the corporal. The good people know you're here and you're looking for them. I can handle the good people, said McNaughton with a laugh. It's the bad people I don't like. Mary waved goodbye and went back inside. McNaughton looked around her. The wind was still circling where she stood, yet the bushes nearby were scarcely moving. She thought she heard a faint voice coming from the direction of the hill. She looked around to see if anyone else was near. There was no one in sight. She listened again. It was as if the wind was talking. Find me. And that's the end of chapter 1. Operation Vanished is available through Flanker Press. You could go to their website and find it, or you can get it on Amazon. It's available in soft copy and ebook, and I hope you enjoy it. It is a best-selling edition, and it's in all the events happen in Newfoundland and Labrador. You can go to all the places that are mentioned, and I really hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Stay safe.